Just as usual, my name is Vasily, and today I will be accompanied by Comrade Thomas.
Hello, everyone. We were able to cover some of the background to the guys who make these videos. In particular, we talked about Paul Kengor and this fake university, PragerU, that no longer calls itself PragerU. You're going to see this older branding that they had to stop using due to a lawsuit from the government, I think. But the interesting thing that came up that we didn't talk about last time connects to something that we did talk about last time. So we talked about how Paul Kengor is an academic associate with the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation, which is getting more and more public attention. And he's associated with the Black Book of Communism and things like that, and how there's going to be a law that's going to share this material to, U.S. school children using public money. But the interesting thing that came up this month was that PragerU actually released another project in partnership with the Department of Education. So this is already being published, this partnership, and which is paid for with American tax money, along with the Trump White House to produce American history content, basically a bunch of videos. So thank you, PragerU, for your contribution to the American life. But yeah, so we see again and again how the government itself is keeping these ideas afloat, and basically pooling out money, dishing out money to these people, and inevitably, with enough repetition, kids are going to believe this, and the public at large does start to believe the stuff they hear, especially when it's coming from the U.S. Department of Education. So yeah, I thought that was interesting that, for the 4th of July and the 250th anniversary or something of the American state, they had this official partnership, PragerU, with the White House and the U.S. government. So we're going to see more and more of this state-funded propaganda.
Just as usual, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you have not done it before.
The Russian Revolution of 1917 should never have happened. The reason it did was because one man and one man alone insisted that it must. That man was Vladimir Lenin.
Right off the bat, I mean, it's the great man theory, just said very explicitly, and they almost humorously, with the tone of his voice and everything, they credit such incredible powers to Lenin's own brain and his personage, as if he created the revolution from absolute thin air. And I think they will even contradict this thesis later on in their video. But yeah, I mean, they say it right there. Their kind of ludicrous view of history that Lenin alone did this, and I think they're going to get into that he did it for bad reasons or something. There's a lot of historians right now who are complaining about the PragerU White House partnership because of how it treats the American Revolution as kind of, in this very similar way, this great man theory kind of propaganda instead of history way, where I think they kind of whitewash some of the political opinions of some of the founding fathers to make them more in line with modern American sensibilities of and not even in terms of slavery and race, but just in terms of John Adams' opinions about democracy or other founding fathers, just political opinions that they would have disagreements about in their own time. PragerU is kind of whitewashing any kind of problems there. So even in American history, they can't resist these kind of fables.
All the death, misery, and incomprehensible suffering that resulted from the creation of the first totalitarian state in human history would not have been possible without him. Attempts to disassociate Lenin from the horrors of Soviet communism are disingenuous. First, and contrary to his apologists, there were no good intentions behind Lenin's insatiable quest for power. Second, since those intentions never existed, it was impossible for Lenin's successor, Joseph Stalin, to distort them.
And they say similar things about Marx previously, or about, how Lenin is a true Marxist. Marx is all about power, and seizing power. And it's an interesting fiction to present that both Marx and Lenin are just purely interested in their own empowerment, or some vague version of that, especially since Marx didn't achieve power for himself. We can see for ourselves, what were Lenin's motivations and what were his intentions. But instead of investigating any of that, we're just kind of told, oh, he did it for bad reasons. He did it for his own personal quest for power, with no investigation of that.
I think we have to deal first with the entire narrative of someone can make a revolution. It's essential to understand that revolutions are not created. They are processes that go mostly spontaneously, as they depend on both objective and subjective factors. We all know that there were a lot of crises in history when power in this or that state was one step from getting thrown in the hands of this or that power. However, not all the crises end with revolutions. Revolutions, as I said, is a mix of objective and subjective factors. And if we speak about socialist revolutions, like the October Revolution, which is the one that PragerU video is referencing, it's a mix of general conditions in Russia in 1917 and the revolutionary vanguard party, which was the Bolshevik party.
Stalin merely completed what Lenin started.
Unlike this video, trying us to say Stalin finished what Lenin started building, and Lenin started building socialism in the Soviet Union. So this is something that we could say that Stalin indeed finished.
Absolutely.
And we could say the same about socialist reconstruction of industry, of agriculture, of we could say similar thing about cultural revolution. Yeah, sure, these processes started during Lenin's period, and Stalin successfully implemented them.
Lenin was born Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov on April 22, 1870, in a small town on the banks of the Volga River. By his own account, he had a happy childhood. A brilliant student, young Vladimir won almost every academic contest he entered. He seemed to be fated for a successful career in the law. His future took a sudden and fateful turn when his older brother Alexander got caught up in the anti-Tsarist fervor sweeping Russia in the late 19th century. For his part in an audacious plot to assassinate the Tsar, Alexander was executed in 1887. Many have speculated that his execution radicalized young Vladimir. Following in his brother's footsteps, he soon became a full-time revolutionary.
Well, they seem to have a little more respect for Lenin than they do for Marx, or at least they're posturing that they do, saying that he was this smart guy, he could have done anything, and they're kind of giving some credit to his ability to organize this socialist movement and the Bolshevik party that was so effective in Russia at that time. So it's just interesting that they're able to admit some good things about him, and I think they would do that for the Stalin thing as well. But Marx is just, he's a lazy guy, he sat around all day, he just went to the library. When they did similar things, I mean, Marx was an organizer himself, as we talked about last time. Marx, organized revolutionary groups and actually was involved in politics. So, but yeah, they seem to, they respect Lenin a little bit, but they say, he's misguided. He's a misguided young man. And I think that touches on, they say something that I enjoyed, the anti-Tsarist fervor that Alexander got himself stuck in. It's a bit like the woke mind virus that conservatives like to talk about, as if young people are just caught up in this wave of popular sentiment, and they can't help themselves but to oppose the dictatorship of the Tsar. How crazy they must be, how zealous and fervorous they must be to oppose the Tsar and a non-democratic system.
Yeah, regarding this fragment, it's worth stating that being against Tsar was not something that was like wow during that period. I have to say that sentiments against monarchy were popular to some extent in Russia, probably since 1825, the Decembrists revolt, when just 13 years after the War of 1812, when Russia showed itself as a nation for the first time, opposing Napoleon's invasion, and Russia was, as you know, victorious. And then turned out there were entire groups of officers who tried to overthrow monarchy or make Russia a constitutional monarchy. And after the defeat of the first bourgeois revolutions, it was something like communists today. Everyone was afraid of Jacobin terror, of revolutions, and then in Russia, in the heart of reaction back then, there happens the Tsarist revolt. They are proclaiming that they want constitution, they want constitutional monarchy. Some of them wanted republic for Russia, and in about 40 or 50 years, we got Bakunin, we got Gertsen, we got socialists, we got well, in English they're called populists, but it's actually not the best translation. In Russian, they're narodniki. Narodniki wanted basically peasants to prosper, and many of them included the ideas of assassinating the Tsar because they thought that it would sparkle the revolution in Russia. And these sentiments were widespread among students in 1860s, 1870s, 1880s. There were entire stories of people organizing in their universities and traveling to villages to educate the peasants. However, most of them failed because peasants were mostly passive towards such education. And this is where the ideas of killing the Tsar became popular again. Students like Lenin's brother thought that assassinating Alexander II, later Alexander III, would show the people of Russia something that is wrong with the regime and force them to do something with this. However, as we know, it ultimately failed. Killing the Tsar meant just replacing it with yet another Tsar, and nothing happened besides increasing repressions. And this is what made Lenin turn towards revolutionary work. Again, it wasn't something like he was avenging his brother, though at some extent we could say that it was like this. But in general, it was not his brother's death, but the general conditions of Russia back then. The period of industrial development, capitalism growing, and a lot of contradictions showing themselves in a short amount of time. People understanding that life is not getting any better, it's only getting worse, and they want to change it. This is what was driving Lenin and other students like him at that period.
For the next 3 decades, he honed his craft, writing pamphlets, gathering supporters, and agitating for a Marxist revolution. Evading the Tsar's secret police, the Okhrana, was a full-time job. And in this, Lenin was only partly successful. In 1897, he was exiled to Siberia for 3 years. Fortunately for him, security was so lax, a mistake Lenin would learn from, he was able to run his communist clique remotely. In 1900, he self-exiled to Europe, where he continued to organize and agitate. For all his efforts, he got nowhere.
Well, right off the bat, they're kind of undoing the work that they did before and that they're going to keep doing, which is to say that the Okhrana was kind of this constant presence and in fact did catch him and send him to jail for his political activity. So, the concept of a czarist dictatorship that is repressing freedom of speech and political action, it's there. I mean, it's at the forefront of even this video has to acknowledge that it really happened.
And here it's funny that the author basically tries to whitewash these giant security spendings nowadays when we have a lot of scanners, we have prisons, we have police, etc., etc., basically filled with arms, with surveillance, and trying to say that Okranka was somehow better, or that they were softer, or that they were so innocent. Like, look, they even let Lenin have correspondence with his comrades. Though in reality, obviously, PragerU says nothing this correspondence was undercover, and at some periods it became just a common fact because it was always written in Lenin's biographies, in other revolutionaries' biographies. They used various things to various workarounds, I would say, such as writing with milk instead of ink, using instruments for writing made of bread, and other things like this. I wouldn't say that it's something soft, it's just how they worked around these difficulties back then. And now, for example, we have various countries blocking access to various services, and there we also have various workarounds like proxies and other things. And it doesn't make the states any much peaceful. And besides that, one thing that's worth mentioning is that the video says that Lenin failed. Like he was trying to do something and he failed. In reality, we all know Lenin's role in the formation of Russian social democracy, in the formation of the Bolshevik party. He was basically the creator of the entire structure. He played an essential role in the Russian revolutionary movement in general, firstly with broad social democrats, with those who would later become Mensheviks, and then his organizational work defending the principles of the communists and even against the leadership of the Second International. So yeah, it's incorrect to say that Lenin failed. He actually successfully did all these things, and it's these things that culminated in the Bolsheviks' victory in 1917. He actually returned to Russia several times.
The Okhrana kept its eye on him, but considered him little more than a minor annoyance.
So here, previously we spoke a little about Okranka. Now I'd add that actually the government paid great attention to infiltrating the ranks of the social democracy, and they sent in various agents on a regular basis, particularly with the aim of getting as much information about the leadership and, first of all, Lenin as possible. We all know that they even managed to sneak the agent in the Central Committee, and it was the case of Malinovsky. Malinovsky was the Tsarist agent within the Bolshevik party. He was a member of the Central Committee. He was one of the deputies in the Russian parliament back then, the State Duma, and he was so good at it that after he left the faction in the parliament, because he was afraid of being uncovered, Lenin was actually defended him because his work was quite valuable, and Lenin himself wrote later that even though he was a provocateur, he was an agent of the government, he had to split around doing harm to the movement and helping it. And though he did a lot of harm, he gave information about various important people in the party to the government, which resulted in their arrest. He also helped the Bolshevik party to spread its influence across the country because he was one of the deputies, and in order to support his image of a deputy, he had to ride across the country, explain the workers all the things that Bolsheviks wanted them to know. And therefore, he was nevertheless helping the communists. So it's impossible to say that Okranka, the state security in Tsarist Russia, was paying few attention. Actually, they had direct interest in the social democratic movement, and they tried to penetrate it by any means possible.
And then in 1914, World War I broke out. The war was a disaster for Russia. As the conflict dragged on for months and years, millions of poorly equipped Russian soldiers died on the front. Millions more deserted. The hopelessly incompetent Tsar Nicholas II took the blame, and in March 1917 chose to abdicate. Lenin saw his chance. Ironically, it was the Germans, Russia's World War I enemy, who helped him seize it. Hoping Lenin would further destabilize the provisional Russian government and thus allow them, the Germans, to fight a one-front war in the West, they put him on a special sealed train and deposited him in St. Petersburg.
This entire Germans sent Lenin to Russia narrative is simply wrong. We have to understand the conditions of the life of Russian Social Democrats, immigrants in Switzerland. After the February Revolution, they wanted to return to Russia somehow. However, the Entente refused to allow them to pass through their territory. So the only possible option was to go through Germany. And PragerU guy says that Germany transported them to Petrograd. In reality, they were not transported to Petrograd. Yes, there was this train that was made so that no any Russians could walk on German soil. They were literally loaded in Switzerland, moved through German territory, but not to Russia, to Sweden. And it's from Sweden that they moved to Russia through Finland, which was a Russian autonomy back then. And this is how they got in Petrograd. And it's worth mentioning that it wasn't Lenin alone. There were actually a lot of social democrats, there were a lot of Russian leftists, there were even guys like social revolutionaries, socialist revolutionaries that were actually an opponents of Lenin, and there were Mensheviks, there were actually a lot of people who later became Bolsheviks' enemies, and saying that Germany would profit from it, well, I guess every nation that is in conflict with other nation expects that transferring revolutionaries of this nation would actually help it. But if we take again the history, we see that Russia made peace with Germany, and this peace did not bring any good things to Germany. On the contrary, Germany got, for example, prisoners of war that were agitated by the Bolsheviks, and this contributed to some extent to the German Revolution. So at the end, Germany was, even if we speak about them allowing Lenin to pass through German territory as something beneficial for Germans, here we could say that by doing so, Germans put a bullet in a pistol that was targeted against them as well.
The German plan worked, and then some. On October 25th, in an act of incredible boldness, Lenin and his band of Bolsheviks took control from the provisional government.
You see, everything is so simple. Germans just send a bunch of guys, as he says, his band, and they take power. So simple. Like, no any Soviets, no any political struggle, no any coups and rebellions in Russia. Just plain and simple. Though obviously it's wrong. We all know that the October Revolution, which was started by the Petrograd Uprising in October 1917, was the result of a long political struggle between Bolsheviks, between social democrats in the Soviets, and between the provisional government, which, again, thanks to Bolsheviks' firmness, steadiness, ability to educate people and agitate against their political opponents, resulted in the victory of the Bolsheviks, of the Soviet power, and it marked the first socialist revolution in basically entire world.
Right, and basically they present it as like an American color revolution, as some call it, where you just have a foreign power like Germany sending in a group of guys who have no connection to the public, no political legitimacy, but you send them in there to take over the government to carry out the interests of a foreign power. I mean, that's how they want us to see it, but I think the reality is much more interesting.
Bolshevik means one of the majority in Russian. But Lenin's rebels were anything but. No matter. Lenin never let the truth get in his way. He promised the Russian people peace, land, and bread. He took their land, there was no peace, and soon there was no bread.
Well, yeah, the author of the video tried to make it as some, funny comparison, though in reality, Bolsheviks were among the few political powers in history that actually fulfilled their promises. Speaking about peace, Lenin withdrew Russia from World War I, which was the bloodiest war of that period, and this was one of the reasons that Americans were sent as fast as possible to fill this gap. So, secondly, about peace, Lenin and the Bolshevik Party managed to solve the land problem and the peasant problem, which was present in Russia for basically centuries. And this is something that several Tsars actually failed to deal with. Alexander II tried to liberate peasants and resulted in just preparing the entire revolution of 1905 and 1917. Later, Nicholas II, the same. His Stolypin prime minister tried to do it in a capitalist way, and it just resulted in peasants becoming very, very, very angry and basically contributing to the revolutions. If we speak about bread, well, Lenin and the Bolshevik Party also managed to establish normal infrastructure with what was left after several years of, again, the bloodiest war in history back then, and after several years of cruel civil war. And the Tsarist government was unable to establish normal supply of cities with food. It was only Bolsheviks that managed to do it.
In November, yielding to popular pressure, it still meant something then, Lenin allowed a national election. He knew he would lose. He was right. The Bolsheviks received only 24% of the vote. This, however, was not a problem for Lenin. When the Constituent Assembly, Russia's new parliament, met in January 1918 and voted to reject the Bolsheviks' takeover of the government, Lenin seized the building. Russia's experiment with democracy was over before it began.
So here, again, just like the previous facts, what we see is a distorted propaganda image that was created out of several fake and false information. If we speak about the entire narrative of Bolsheviks destroying the Constituent Assembly, we have to keep in mind that these elections that took place in November were actually organized in spring of 1917, and it was when the whole organization of these elections was debated, and the provisional government and the Soviets that were controlled by socialist revolutionaries and Mensheviks back then tried to organize them that way so that the most radical elements of the army, workers and peasants were smoothed by other layers of population. And this is why, well, I was reading about that a lot, and this is why they, for example, ordered the sailors to vote in their ports during the war, when obviously the fleets are moving, and it's not always that you can vote in the city where your fleet is supposed to be. Plus, it allowed the provisional government to have the voices from most radical people, like those who supported Bolsheviks, to be smaller. If you take, for example, a fleet and it votes for Bolsheviks, it counts as one or several deputies. However, if you put this fleet into a city and the entire city is in favor of Mensheviks and Social Democrats, It means that the city, together with the fleet, would send deputies for these political powers. And therefore you can clearly see how it was unprofitable for Bolsheviks, because the elections were organized in a way that was obsolete after the October Revolution, and the Bolsheviks decided to do nothing with this because they wanted the population, those who voted for the Soviets, to see the results of voting for the Constituent Assembly. Yes, it's true that Bolsheviks were a minority there, even with left socialist revolutionaries. It was known that the first meeting of this assembly was opened with deputies refusing to accept the various decrees about land, about peace, about Soviet power, and after that it was simply closed. The people who were guarding the building said that they are tired and they will leave the building, and then it will be open for everybody to walk in and do with the deputies anything they want to do with them. Throughout the entire video, no any word about Soviets is being told. Like, we're just told that the Bolsheviks overthrew the government and ended democracy, without anything said about the Soviet democracy, about the Soviets being actual democracy, about Bolsheviks getting power through, well, after the uprising in a legal way. They opened the All Russia Congress of Soviets, declared that the power is being transferred to the Soviets, and the deputies simply agreed with that.
Right, and again, if we compare it to the American Revolution, that would be like completely ignoring the existence of the Constitutional Congress and or any American body that gave political legitimacy to the representation of the American patriot side of the conversation, and just saying only the British Parliament matters, and just completely ignoring the existence of any other body. That would basically be the framing that they would apply if they were. Legitimate or they're principled about how they're presenting this.
How would Lenin rule? Never one to mince words, he told the party leadership, "We can't expect to get anywhere unless we resort to terrorism." Within months of taking power, he established his own secret police, known as the Cheka, an early form of the KGB. To lead it, Lenin appointed his trusted fellow Bolshevik, Felix Dzerzhinsky, a maniacally ruthless and efficient killer, a prototype of a kind of soulless bureaucrat that totalitarian systems never seem to lack.
Again, another example of propaganda, which works just like Nazi propaganda. The bigger lies you say, the higher is the chance that people will actually believe it. And when I hear people like this saying that Dzerzhinsky was evil, bloody tyrant or totalitarian bureaucrat, it's simply funny, because Dzerzhinsky is actually known for doing a lot of things for Russian children after the Civil War. Yes, he was leading the Cheka, which is, if I remember correctly, the translation is All Russian Commission. Well, I don't remember the translation of the second word, though it was created as means to oppose growing counter-revolution, and here it's important to say that the Soviet power after the October Revolution, after the beginning of the October Revolution, was actually very, very soft on its enemies. The counter-revolutionary generals were just let away. Just go, you can do everything that you can, or just say that you won't do anything bad against the Soviet power. This is like it was in, for example, November, December 1917, the first months of the Soviet power. And after the beginning of the Civil War, the situation became very, very tense. And it was previously mentioned that socialist revolutionaries tried to assassinate the Soviet leadership. particularly Lenin. They attempt to kill Lenin, and it was no comments. Obviously, in such conditions, harsh, strict power was necessary to handle all these things, and well, obviously, Cheka was created. Again, if we compare it to the American Revolution, it's like saying that the British were bad, but Americans were 10 times worse, something like this. And if we return to Dzerzhinsky, this person is actually known for his efforts in organizing the life of children after the Civil War, because there were a lot of men wounded, killed, a lot of them became refugees, and the situation with the childhood was terrible. And it was Dzerzhinsky who paid a lot of attention to this problem, who organized kindergartens, who organized houses for orphan childs, who did everything he could to ease the life after the Civil War. And again, saying that, trying to portray this person as some sort of evil, bloody totalitarian bureaucrat is no comments.
The Tsar's Okhrana was bad. Lenin's Cheka was 10 times worse. It wasn't long before civil war broke out. A motley assembly of opposition parties, czarists, and disenchanted peasants were on one side, and the Bolsheviks on the other, the whites versus the reds. Lenin welcomed the conflict. It allowed him to justify any action to consolidate his control. He shut down freedom of speech, assembly, the press, and religion. He carried out mass arrests, held show trials, and had whole villages massacred. He declared an all-out war on the Kulaks.
Well, actually, all these things that he said were implemented by the whites, including wiping the entire villages. This is how, by the way, they turned Siberia red. Because at the beginning of the Civil War, the communists had a lot of influence in the cities, and Siberia was mostly a rural area with peasants who were not interested in the question of land. Most of them migrated there for actual land, and they got it. And when there was an uprising of Czechoslovak forces, a lot of them supported them. However, after the whites started organizing their government, they started mobilizing people against the Red Army, and they did it in extremely brutal way, like literally wiping entire villages. And this is what led peasants to forming entire partisan armies that were operating in the rear of the white forces, and basically leading the entire class towards the communists in the region.
A word that he applied to land-owning farmers, but it really referred to anyone Lenin didn't like.
Yeah, so in PragerU's opinion, kulaks are just anyone Lenin didn't like. I believe our audience knows who kulaks were, and they were rich peasants. They were basically rural capitalists who were using labor, and that labor was cheap. They paid very few for it, and it was what caused the entire village to crumble. Again, if we speak about the peasants, about the land question in Russia, we have to keep in mind that after Alexander II allegedly liberated peasants, he did it without any land, and he forced peasants to pay debts that would take several generations to pay. So they were liberated in 1861, and they had to pay these debts to the state and to the former nobility up to 1920 or 1930. Just imagine your children and your grandchildren living just to pay money for the state. And Obviously, it sounds horrible even nowadays, and back then peasants were terribly angry. And this process of industrialization created a lot of poor peasants who became rural workers, and very, very few small rich minority, and these guys were called kulaks. And they were indeed responsible for hoarding grain, for killing Soviet workers, for killing representatives of the Soviet government, and it's no wonder that the Soviet power took decisive actions against them. However, saying that kulaks were anyone Lenin didn't like, it's actually today when anyone PragerU doesn't like is called communist, socialist, totalitarian, etc.
Before it was over, hundreds of thousands had died for the Marxist utopia.
It's worth mentioning there that hundreds of millions of people died for the capitalist utopia, which is actually dystopia.
Right, and again, blaming kind of like they did with Marx, or I think in other videos where every death of like the Stalin stuff, where every death from World War II is actually Stalin's fault. Every death from this enormous civil war that wasn't just the Bolsheviks' project alone. It wasn't just the sole product of Lenin's mind, like we were told at the beginning. This was a civil conflict that had been raging and building for decades, and was really spurred on by the breakdown of the state with World War I. They just say, oh, it's all these every death from the Russian Civil War, that's actually Lenin's personal responsibility.
By 1922, Lenin had Russia, now the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, firmly under his thumb. The Bolsheviks, the Reds, ruled the largest country on Earth.
Again, speaking about the largest country on Earth, it's funny that throughout the entire video, they're showing the map of the modern Russia with Crimea. While the Soviet Union consisted of various republics, it was actually a union of Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, various republics of Caucasus and the Central Asia.
Ordering mass murder, torture, and terror didn't take any toll on Lenin's conscience, but it did on his body. In 1922 and 1923, Lenin suffered a series of strokes. He died on January 21st, 1924, at age 53. There was no good Lenin. He was a monster.
Right, yeah. The way he delivers the lines is kind of like very, very funny and smug for the kind of silly things that he's saying, saying that Lenin wasn't bothered by it, but he was bothered by it. What? So which is it? Was he stressed out and had a stroke, or was he not stressed out? Like, make up your mind. Was it caused by the things he was doing or not? They want it both ways in this particular case. Right, and they just kind of gesture saying, oh, there's all this torture, there's all this terror. Well, talk about it. What were the consequences? And they give the big number, right, hundreds of thousands of deaths. But that we know from their framing that that's the total deaths from the whole Civil War. Even victims of the whites and everyone the whites killed are said to have died for the Marxist utopia. So let's see what Lenin himself did that was so terrible. They can't even present specific information. They just the most specific they get was talking about Dzerzhinsky and the Cheka. That's it.
Unfortunately for Russia and the world, another monster would soon take his place.
I would add that compared to the previous video that we covered on Karl Marx, we see any differences. It's just the same utter lies, propaganda. Again, a lot of these narratives that PragerU is promoting promoted by the Nazis, things like evil Lenin, killing all the peasants, and again, if we return to the example of Охранка, we can see that PragerU tries to whitewash people who are responsible for anti-Semite narratives up to the modern times. And the funniest thing here is that a lot of things that were implemented by the Nazis were actually invented and promoted by Russian monarchists. And it's these guys that PragerU tries to whitewash, saying that Cheka was allegedly 10 times worse than Russian Tsarist state security. If you want to know the extent of how much Russian monarchists influenced the Nazis, I have to say that Alfred Rosenberg, who is one of the Nazi leaders, who was one of the Nazi leaders, was actually from Russian Baltics when they were controlled by the Russian Empire. And in 1917, when the Civil War broke out and the Germans were gathering their counter-revolutionary Freikorps, Rosenberg was refused to join them because he was considered to be too much Russian. No comments. Like Nazi ideologist from the future was considered to be too much Russian by the Germans living in the Baltics. And it's these guys who are promoted as being better than communists. So for PragerU, anti-Semites and Nazis are better than communists.
Right, and for how ridiculous these guys are, and for how awful their kind of views on the whites and the Soviets are, we see that the things they say and the theories that they promote are repeated and really believed even by left-wing people. You've got even people who call themselves socialists or call themselves supporters of Lenin will believe a lot of this stuff that PragerU is putting out because it mainly fits into this Stalin thing, this concept of Stalin being this great evil and Lenin being the hero. I think this video kind of touches on that some of what they would hate Stalin for, Lenin was doing, and in fact it wasn't as evil and spooky and scary as PragerU would have you believe. That there's actually a history to it that they should investigate if they were serious about their interest in the Soviet project and socialism. They would treat Lenin's situation and the problems of the Soviet state that Stalin would have to address as well. They should take these more seriously, but instead they kind of do what PragerU does, which is this lazy kind of it's dictatorship, death. The Soviets don't matter, that kind of thing.
I agree with that, and I think the next time we will also be covering the Stalin video, which I think just like this video and video about Karl Marx is going to be funny to debunk. Thank you for joining in today. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe, and see you next time. Goodbye, comrades.
Bye.